And we're back with the program. This is Joe Glassford from Pop Culture Cosmos and Game Source. And I'll tell you what, Week 9 in the NFL is upon us. And I'll tell you what, it's another great action-packed weekend in football indeed coming up for us. But we had a major event this week in the NFL trading deadline. And I'll tell you what, it was just truly exciting for many, many reasons. And we'll go into that. Well, who better to go into that than my good friend from I'll say it right this time because I was listening to one of my podcasts on Monday and I happened to have said the Fantasy Football Podcast. No. It's the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast.
Paydirt.
Paydirt, because I always forget the Paydirt. It's the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, and it's my good friend Tyler Baker, the host, and also the curator of Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast on Facebook. Brain fart. On Facebook, and also as well, ffpaydirt.com. Always good to talk to you, my friend.
Yes, sir. It's all about the pay dirt, man. You work all season to get the pay dirt.
That's right, indeed. And I'm a man. I own up to my mistakes. So when I forget the pay dirt, because sometimes when I'm doing my intros, we've got Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Podcast coming up, and like I listened to that like a few days later. I'm like, you edited this, you moron. You should have listened to it more carefully.
Man, no worries. It's good to be on your show, man.
Oh,
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, always great to have you on. We love it. In fact, each and every time you're on, you always seem to give us new insight, whether it's from your site, ffpaydirt.com, or being a part of your Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast Facebook group. Because if you need help with lineups, as far as waiver wire pickups and the whole 9 yards when it comes to your fantasy football team, because now is the time to act because the playoffs are just around the corner. And the NFL trade deadline just hit, and there's no better place to go than the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast Facebook group to get those questions answered. But we'll go into that a little bit more depth later on as we close out our interview. But first, the aforementioned NFL trade deadline just came and went, and for reasons that all across the board, it was one of the more amusing NFL trade deadlines that I can remember. So I'll tell you what, you enlighten us,
sure,
and myself as well, on what your thoughts are on NFL trade deadline action and how it affects fantasy football owners out there, including me.
Sure. Yeah, there was a lot happening on Halloween this year. With the trade deadline, I can't remember a year where so many things happened on the trade deadline.
I think it was Halloween. I think it was because it was a Halloween itself.
Yeah. So what you saw basically is you saw teams getting rid of guys that they were not going to sign to a contract next year and getting draft picks for them. That's basically what it boiled down to. So you had Kelvin Benjamin of the Carolina Panthers moving, and it blew my mind. He plays for the Buffalo Bills now. It made sense because there are some coaching guys and the GM or from Carolina, so they were familiar with this player. They wanted to get him. It really blows my mind though for Carolina because at the start of the season they wanted to get Christian McCaffrey involved. They wanted to do these cute little short routes. It wasn't working. They lost games, so they went back to Cam Newton throwing the ball downfield to his big body targets, and especially Kelvin Benjamin. Cam Newton said just last week that if he was in a foxhole, he would want to be in the foxhole with Kelvin Benjamin.
Well, it doesn't make any sense to him either because he obviously, after the trade happened, he kind of questions, well, and even Steph Curry from the Golden State Warriors questioned it as well.
It didn't make sense. The only thing that makes sense is that they knew that they were not going to keep him. And so why not get a third and a sixth round for him now? So that's the only bit of credit that I can give to the Panthers, but it does not make sense because now it puts him in a position where you've got Devin Funchess is your downfield guy now. Now, Greg Olsen will be back in a couple of weeks. He's testing his foot. it looks like he's going to be back. So that'll help. But for right now, that's a pretty tight division right now. And Carolina was just getting on a roll. And now suddenly Cam Newton's favorite go-to guy downfield is gone.
Well, so, Tyler, I'll tell you this. When they tell you it's not about the money, it's about the money.
It's a business. And like I said, they apparently had already made this decision that they were not going to re-sign him. And so if they already knew that they weren't going to re-sign him, they got a 3rd and a 6th round pick off of him. So that's not bad. And the same thing happened in New England. Remember, just about a month or so ago, they traded Jacoby Brissett. Well, now they traded Jimmy Garoppolo. So what they ended up doing is they went out and signed Brian Hoyer to now come in and be Tom Brady's backup because he didn't have a backup quarterback.
Yeah, but he came from San Francisco, which Garoppolo just went to.
Yes. Yeah. So there wasn't going to be any kind of a trade thing. And, I wasn't in those meetings, but they dropped him. And Hoyer had a couple of offers, one from the Packers and, of course, from New England. Well, who are you going to go play for? You're going to go play for New England. That's where his career started. He spent 4 years, I think, behind Tom Brady. It made sense for Hoyer, made sense for the New England Patriots, and Hoyer could get a ring out of it.
Well, two other things that I want to talk to you when it comes to the NFL trading deadline. Well, actually, there's 3, but the third one's kind of a joke. But first off, Russell Wilson did get some help, and that could actually potentially help not only him, but actually all the, any fantasy football team that has Seattle as part of its fantasy football player options.
Russell Wilson actually took a pay cut so that they could sign left tackle. Oh, what's his name? Dwayne Brown, I think. His name escapes me. But that was an offensive line that has had Russell Wilson running for his life. And it's not been good for Seattle, but Russell Wilson is just one of those great talents, and they've managed to win some games. But with this, now they have a solid left tackle that can cover his blind side. That's pretty big for all of, like you said, all the Seattle skill player positions. I think especially a guy like Tyler Lockett, who maybe didn't have time to get downfield, now might have some time to get downfield, but not just him, but for that entire offense, it's really going to help a lot.
And also as well, speaking of possibly some offensive changes, one that concerns me a great deal was a trade that I didn't see coming, that the Philadelphia Eagles looked to bolster their already strong offensive corps with a pick that concerns me how I'm going to play that individual down the road.
Well, you're talking about Jay Ajayi, and man, this is a really good deal for the Eagles because Jay Ajayi is still in his rookie contract. So they can keep him next year for under $1 million. I think like $760,000. Now for fantasy purposes, what a muddled mess it is now. Now the good thing is the Eagles, I think, have the 3rd best rushing offense in the NFL. So he's going to a team where if he gets opportunity, he can make some things happen. He's more talented than LeGarrette Blount. He's more talented than Wendell Smallwood. Now, the Eagles have come out and said, blah, 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 LeGarrette Blount's our starter, blah, blah, blah. That's nonsense. Jay Ajayi is so much better. Now, you may still see LeGarrette Blount on a short yardage role. I think for the foreseeable future, it's going to be a running back by committee or a hot hand approach. I think the biggest loser is probably Wendell Smallwood. But if Jay Ajayi gets in there and his knee doesn't flare up, he passed the physical, the Eagles looked at his stuff and everything was fine. If he can get in there and prove that the knee's okay and prove that he doesn't need his snaps limited, he could play a lot. I don't think it happens quickly. He still has to get used to a new team. And he's only been with one team since he's been in the league. So it's not like he's a veteran that's gone around and understands all these different concepts. And I don't know those two offensive schemes, how they compare well enough to say it'll be a smooth transition or not. But it could be good for Jay Ajayi in a couple of weeks. Moving forward the next couple of weeks, I would be hesitant to play any Philadelphia Eagle running back.
But playoff time, it could be a different option, and he could be a big play.
He could be.
So don't So for fantasy owners out there, you advise at least keeping him on your roster at this point in time.
Yeah, I think the only guy you can drop there is probably Wendell Smallwood. I think he's the odd man out. So if you have a Smallwood on your roster and you see somebody out there you really want, go ahead and drop him. I'm not saying he's a must drop because this is a whole new backfield now. And don't forget that Lane Johnson, their starting left tackle, is out. So I'm expecting a little bit of regression there from that offense because he was such a huge part. And when he went down last year, you saw a pretty bad nosedive by the Eagles. I think they're a better team now. But it's just a muddled mess. I wish I had a definitive answer, but I don't because we just haven't seen it yet. And also in Miami, now with Jay Ajayi leaving, there's Kenyon Drake and Damian Williams. There's a lot of back and forth as to who is going to be the guy there. I think it's going to be a combination of both of them. I like Williams a little bit better. I think Kenyon Drake is a little bit more athletic, but where he's played in some games in the past and gotten his opportunity, he's kind of done some bonehead stuff, just made dumb plays. And if you're talking about an offense relying on someone, I think Damian Williams is a better move for the Miami Dolphins to give him more carries. But that's another situation where we'll just have to see what Adam Gase has up his sleeve.
Once again, it is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast. You can catch his great shows every Tuesday and Saturday. That's on Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast.fm, Player.fm, and SoundCloud. You can also check out his great site, ffpaydirt.com. Or if you want to ask him a question directly or one of his great staff members, stop on by the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast group.
You got it.
Facebook. I got it this time. You can follow their Facebook group, and you can always ask those lineup changes, trade questions, and also waiver wire pickup questions as well. Tyler.
Are you about to ask me a question about the 0-8 Cleveland Browns?
I tell you what, I am going to ask you a question about the 0-8 Cleveland Browns. At least I am not a fan of that team, but for someone who is out there, I really feel for you.
Yeah.
I really feel for you indeed. These rules regarding the NFL trade deadline have been set up for eons as far as how it's structured, and most importantly, when the deadlines are at.
And they don't mess around with it.
And they don't mess around with it. No, and one thing we've come to learn about the NFL, they don't mess around with a lot of stuff. They do some things wrong, they do some things right, but they don't mess around either which way. There's no gray area. So I ask you, how does the Browns screw up a trade that was going to be something that really could have looked, kind of possibly even something that could have helped them very much so going forward in the future?
Well, the best thing that has happened to the Cleveland Browns in recent years is that Kevin Costner movie. That was the best thing that has happened to that franchise. Right now, you have the ownership and the front office and the head coach kind of just in a power struggle, and they're not getting along, and the entire team is suffering from the top down. Now, we're not in those meetings, but there was a trade that was trying to get put together, and Hugh Jackson, the coach, wanted it to happen. The ownership wanted it to happen. And apparently the front office just kind of didn't let it happen. Sashi Brown and Paul DePodesta, they just dropped the ball. And amid rumors, they were saying, "Oh no, there's no trade." So it's just a big mess.
Well, basically, from what I understand, the terms were agreed upon by both the Bengals to trade A.J. McCarron, who's a backup quarterback on the team, to the Cleveland Browns for conditional draft choices. It was all agreed upon. Actually, paperwork was sent to the NFL on the Bengals side before 1 p.m., which was the deadline, but the Browns sent theirs after.
I mean,
and asked the NFL right after that to say, "Hey, look, we kind of sent it late, but can you still do the trade?"
It's the Browns, man. I mean, I don't know what to say.
Well, that's right there. I think your laughter said it all. That's why a lot of people just treat them like a joke, because obviously they have set the precedent with
Yes.
things like this in order to
Yes.
do so.
Yep.
But I'll tell you what, there's some other great, more sensible things to talk about as we finish up here. Once again, Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast joining me. What matchups are you looking forward to this weekend in the NFL? I know your Saturday show, you're going to be talking all about the injuries and some last minute waiver wire additions and all that, and maybe even more on the NFL trade deadline. But what matchups do you think are going to play out strong that people need to focus on for their fantasy teams this coming weekend?
Yeah, well, real quick, I want to jump back to the Browns. Forgive me.
Okay, I thought we were moving away, but I guess we're coming right back in.
But there is a bright spot. There is a bright spot there, and that is that Commissioner Roger Goodell has agreed to conditionally reinstate wide receiver Josh Gordon. That's now Josh Gordon 3 years ago. Well, actually 4 years ago, came out, led the NFL in receiving, and just completely blew up. Had some problems. Not going to get into any of that, but the league is going to reinstate him. He is right now eligible to attend team meetings, and he can do individual drills, and he will be back November 20th to start practicing with the team, which would set him up for a week 13 return. Now, for fantasy purposes, should you get him? Should you not get him? I think the answer is to get him. If you have a spot on your roster, get him. The only problem is when he's first eligible in week 13, that's going to be the beginning of the playoffs. You're not going to play him in week 13. This is a guy who has not seen an NFL field in 3 years. He's definitely not in NFL playing shape. So it could take him a little bit of time to get reacquainted with the game. But if you can pick him up, and if your team makes it to the playoffs, if you're not in the playoff hunt, forget about it. He's not going to do you any good. But if you are in the playoff hunt and you pick him up, you see him play week 13. And if you see a spark, then maybe your week 14, 15, and 16 matchups, you might be able to play him. So pick him up if you have room. Don't dump somebody you were considering starting during any of those playoff games, because it's just a really big risk. The guy hasn't been on an NFL field in 3 years. So we don't know who he is anymore. But if you can make room on your roster, do it. And you may, if he comes around, you may have him for your championship game.
Exactly what I was thinking, that if he shows promise at all in weeks 13, 14, and 15, that for that final weekend, the championship matchup, if your team is lucky enough to get there, that he could be that secret ingredient for your success come the championship game. So that's definitely some great advice there. But are there any other matchups you're looking forward to this weekend before we head on out?
I am looking forward to seeing who these teams are with these new players. For the ones that play, I'm pretty sure Kelvin Benjamin's going to play. That'll give Tyrod Taylor a real number one receiver. They're playing the Jets, who the Jets have been playing a lot better than they have been. Buffalo's at 5-2. Like Buffalo's in the playoff hunt. So that's one that I'm going to be watching, because the Jets can play up and play well. And that Buffalo Jets game, it is a Thursday night game, so it's prime time. Everybody's going to be watching it. That's one that, if you'd asked me 2 weeks ago, no, but that's actually one of the ones that I'm looking forward to seeing. Denver has a new quarterback. Brock Osweiler is going to be throwing the ball for them. It'll be interesting to see. I'm especially interested in that game because Brock Osweiler had some really good success when he was in Denver, and he had pretty good chemistry with a couple guys, and Demaryius Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. They're still there. And that team actually has confidence in him. As bad as he was in Houston, and as bad, well, he never really played with the Browns, but as bad as he was in Houston, he was actually pretty good in Denver. So Trevor Siemian has been benched, which he should. He's just been terrible. So to see Brock Osweiler as the quarterback of the Denver Broncos against a really good Philadelphia team will be interesting. So that's one I'm going to be watching. And then, of course, you have the NFC South matchup of the Atlanta Falcons and the new look Carolina Panthers. We'll see how that Panthers offense looks now. I think it was a terrible move. And if it was a move for the future to get those draft picks, that's fine. But it looks to me like you really put yourself in a bad spot until Greg Olsen comes back, because Cam Newton loves to throw high to big targets downfield. And now he's got Curtis Samuels. He's like 5-0. Russell Shepard, 6 foot. So to see how Carolina comes out and plays against division rival Atlanta Falcons, that's one that I'm going to be looking at a lot too.
That's some great, great words indeed from the man who knows it all when it comes to fantasy football. It is Tyler Baker from the Fantasy Football Paydirt Podcast, which again, you can catch on Apple Podcasts also as well. Catch it on Stitcher, TuneIn, Overcast.fm, Player.fm, and SoundCloud. Tyler, it's going to be another great week in the NFL.
Yeah.
Unless you're a Browns fan.
Yeah.
But I truly appreciate you taking the time to talk to us again, and
of course,
look forward to recapping Week 9 in the NFL for our Monday show, the Pop Culture Cosmos. But we truly appreciate you stopping by now to preview it right here on the PCC Multiverse.
Always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much for having me on.
Always great to have you on and being part of the Pop Culture Cosmos.